Good morning and welcome. It's one of the strange honors that a Londoner has to be welcoming you to an event in your own city. Nonetheless, it gives me great pleasure to be back in Moscow, to be working with the city of Moscow, its mayor, and the Strelka Institute to open out these issues of urban development with you for today. Of course, what's on our minds is overcrowded housing, a lack of private sector supply, difficulty in affordability, and that's just in London, the city I come from. So these housing challenges are not unique to you here in Moscow, but we are all very interested to learn about how Moscow is facing these challenges, because the agenda in terms of modern urban development is as much about how cities learn from one another as about how you can bring in outsiders to share their perspectives with you. So with that, I'd like to say that we have a number of very brilliant experts to share their perspectives with you. Because of shortage of time, we will need to be very brief, very crisp, but I'll welcome them each in turn. We'll get into very brief presentations, about 5 or 6 minutes each, and then hopefully there'll be some chance for discussion and some questions from the floor. Firstly, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome Sergey Kuznetsov, Chief Architect of Moscow. Alejandro Aravena from Elemental, Pritzker Prize jury member from Chile. Hugo Priemus from the Netherlands. Elisabete Franca from Sao Paulo in Brazil. David Falagan from Catalonia in Spain. My colleague from London, Miss Roberts-Hughes. Andrey Nesterenko from here in Russia, from the Rose Group. And because of shortage of chairs, we'll invite Vladimir Plotkin to join us with his expertise shortly to make a presentation also. So with that, I'll hand over to in a sense, to our genuine host for today, even though I'm doing the welcome. And it's really, Sergey, for us to hear from you on your perspectives on what is a real challenge and that you, I know, are facing brilliantly because you have some lessons to share with international participants, as well as giving colleagues here from Moscow a taste of what's in your thinking. Welcome.
Спасибо, Джо. Здравствуйте, дорогие.
Thank you, John. Good morning. I may have my presentation presently. I will tell you in brief, and I will try to make it within my time slot, about the matters of concern in terms of developing this city, the quarters, the regions, and what we have and where we want to arrive. So in a couple of words, I will start with the history of development of Moscow, building Moscow. Historically, Moscow, well, things like that are obvious. They're written. The writing is on the wall, but we need to just to repeat them as ABC today. Historically, Moscow was built in a very proper, correct manner. From the urban science, it was a weighed and balanced city for many years. Until the early 20th century. So what I believe by balance and proper nature is a very good mix of functions, pedestrian accessibility, the principles of quarters, one house, one facade, and public floors, first ground floors, and the comfortable environment where a person could satisfy their requirements. Here's the requirements at a very in a walking distance, and the city had all the properties and faculties of a proper European city, or more or less Moscow was even exceeding other Russian cities and European cities in a number of indicators. Up to 75% of people were renting the residence, so the migration was quite high. People could move easily when they changed jobs. Today, we understand that it was facilitating the comfort and the flexibility in the city. And then, during the Soviet times, over the first the first decades, the principles were kept. So again, we see the quarters as principles. Those quarters were built somewhere in the 1930s, 50s, and then the houses, the buildings were constructed with very individualistic features. I live somewhere in Peshchane Street, it's in the north. This is proper European building with the public ground floors. The environment there where the person can both sleep like in sleeping quarters, but have a full spectrum of facilities, and people can communicate, go to restaurants, to stores, to shops, take kids out, and in a very safe and comfortable mode. But then the problems that that evolved later, and when the city started building similar boxes, faceless boxes, and of low quality. Unfortunately, we have very many of such quarters. And the new issue with new projects that after I have become the chief architect, having analyzed the situation, I see over last decades, and in the current plans, we still have those templates the same. So we evolve, we continue, we expand the problem. Monofunctional quarters without any infrastructure, without any environment so it is not development, it is just construction of mechanistic very similar buildings, and this is a target for criticism and low quality of life, low quality of labor resources and comfort. The city as a consumer who needs high quality labor and talents and positive atmosphere among the citizens. Citizens again require high quality format for residence and living, and that's how we can achieve the level of satisfaction or dissatisfaction. This is very important. We have analyzed the current status in Europe. For instance, I know quite well about Germany. I have vast experience of working there. As you know, the company I headed jointly with my partner has close links to German architectural transitions. I was working with projects in Germany, and it was easy for me to compare, to show, and it is not even a subject for analysis, but the knowledge that I have, my background, and therefore I have been showing this presentation before. We were having a meeting with the construction company, design companies, just to show that the basic principles can be totally different, absolutely different, and the city will have a totally different capacity and view with a different density. The density even quite higher. That is surprising. And we may have high-rise buildings, but when they all look alike, it is not an explanation, of efficiency. You can get the same space, but make them much more comfortable and designed properly. So this is Osthofen construction, or Hafen City in Hamburg, where you can see more humane scale, different sizes and dimensions of quarters. Every building has its own face, and this is a ground for communication and communities through the ground floor, through the space that allows people to have something individual, to have a different format, not just staying in those uniformed cubes during the night hours. So this is the construction, or then you go deeper into the design and the facades. Just the diversity and the colors that you see. It's not that we want to make expensive houses out of cheap, but for the same money you can have a totally different look and feel and quality. Look at those European buildings with the diversity and the options and variants, creating totally different atmospheres, where the person does not feel or that he is a part of an ant house, ant pile. Sometimes staying in a house for many months, you cannot even identify your own window. You are feeling like an ant, and the children that are growing in a faceless environment have different culture and do not have this culture of use of the city and quality of life and environment. Grow up with certain physical psychological deficiencies, which is very difficult to compensate in the future during the adult. We get a totally different issue of those gray, faceless, standardized quarters and gray people, which will be global for the whole country, for the economy. And therefore, today we have positive examples that are observed in Moscow and around Moscow that I would like to show. We are not skidding. There is a way to go. We have first examples of different format of housing that already uses not probably ideal, but striving to achieve ideal principles and goals. And then new territories, we have new houses, and it would all be done with prefabricated elements. It does not mean expensive. It is comparable. It is still mass construction, and we have already built that. They are not very numerous yet, but quite they're not omnipresent. But this is exactly the format of construction. Of course, it would be ideal to have jobs and entertainment sites here. So far, we call it residential, but again, the segregation of function and our tradition for Moscow, when we say that there are residential quarters and there are industrial quarters and there are some public quarters, today we question this concept of separation of function and by the government of Moscow and the architectural authorities of Moscow. So the mix of functions and the proximity of jobs, hospital, recreation, green areas, and in close proximity, walking distance is a priority for the planning format. Yesterday there was a session on the master plans and we discussed it in detail. So with this principle of industrial construction of residential houses, so give us very many positive, a positive impetus for the building policy of the city as a whole. Let me show you some other examples, having in mind that we don't have much time. This is Moscow Oblast. Again, I believe that this is a very good project and people will keep talking about it. City in the forest. I will just go through it quickly. This is a current project I managed to participate and design. Unfortunately, the slides are slow, but we have to wait for the slides changing. And if I may request someone to flip it. I don't know. All the principles that I mentioned are being used here. We have public spaces, we have public ground floors, we have residential floors, we have private and public territories, yards, one house, one facade, individual entrances, and the schools and daycare for children and for babies, and it gives you a different feeling for the quality of life of the people who live there. So I have some other example, but I guess we better skip them and listen to other presentations. Because the slides are slow, but the message that I wanted to convey, the takeaway from my presentation and the issues that I wanted to highlight as a chief architect and both the mayor and our construction industry in the city have already outlined it, so I can only suggest that we proceed with other presentations and then discussions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kuznetsov, for this scintillating vision of, firstly, the challenge facing Moscow and the plans for facing those challenges. Can I invite Alejandro Aravena to the stage? I'm afraid we must be brisk and take only 5 minutes, but you've come a long way. What are the principal things that occur to you?
Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm lucky because what I'm going to tell to you now is what we're doing. In the afternoon at 2 p.m., I'm going to show how we are doing this. But the idea is that we do believe cities are simultaneously magnets and bombs. True, but this is moving very slowly. Is it moving at all? You know what? I'm not using the PowerPoint, so forget about the PowerPoint. So the idea is the following. Cities are powerful vehicles to create wealth. They're able to attract people, ideas, knowledge, and because of that, they are able to create development. Simultaneously, cities concentrate a lot of pressure in the form of political time bombs. But cities are shortcuts towards equality. So they can dismantle social time bombs because they are able to upgrade quality of life in a very short period of time. What I'm going to show in the afternoon is 2 cities we were given where we are trying to design them simultaneously as magnets and dismantling devices for social time bombs. Focused on housing, which is only one part of the city, I would like to give you a little bit of context. The world will grow by 2050 to 75% of urban dwellers. That is good news, because cities create wealth. The bad news is that if today we do have, out of the 3 billion people living in cities, 1 billion under the line of poverty, by 2030, we're going to have 2 billion people living under the line of poverty. If transformed into an equation, we need to build a 1 million people city per week with $10,000 per family for the next 20 years to cope that urban migration. So what we have done in Chile with this $10,000 and even less subsidy is social housing following 2 points. The first point is that $10,000, in the best of the cases, can build around 30 to 40 square meters. Evidence shows that if there is money, be it private money or public money, and you are a middle-class family, you can live okay in around 80 square meters. But what if there's no money, which is the case of the majority of the world? Normally, 2 things happen: displace and reduce. You build housing where land cost nothing, far away in the peripheries, segregated from the opportunities cities concentrate, and you reduce the size, in average, in the world, to 30 to 40 square meters. So the first thing we did in our practice was, instead of considering 40 square meters as a small house, we thought, what if we think of 40 square meters as half of a good house? Not half of a house, half of a good house. The same size can be reframed not as a small, tiny unit, but as half of a good one. When you reframe the question as half of a good house, the question is, which half do we do? And with public money, we decided to do the half that a family will never be able to achieve on its own. We identified 5 design conditions that belong to the half that families cannot do individually. Chilean policy is property-oriented. So when you get a subsidy, you become the owner of the house. It's a small country, but nevertheless, we have 100,000 subsidies a year. So the second point was houses should be the opposite of a car, in the sense that every day that goes by, the value of that property should go up and not down like cars. And social housing in Latin America is closer to buying cars than buying houses. The value of the property goes down. And if you're an owner of the house and housing subsidy is the biggest trespass of money, public money, into a family asset, one would like that money to grow so that housing could be considered an investment and not just a social expense. So we identified 5 design conditions that can allow housing to perform as an investment and not as an expense. So a tool to overcome poverty and not just a shelter against the environment. So half of a good house instead of a small one, able to gain value over time, is what we're doing with housing, with several built projects in Chile and around the world, and I hope in this afternoon I'm going to be able to prove, so that you can believe and not just trust what I'm saying right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alejandro. What's interesting is just how different the housing perspectives are according to your context. And so now we pass along to the Netherlands and Hugo Priemus, who will give us a perspective from Delft University.
Thank you very much. My presentation is about social housing in mega cities. And what we observe since World War II, and in particular since 1990, is a spectacular change in tenure in Europe and in Russia. We see an increase of owner-occupied housing. We see a decrease of social rented and public rental housing, and also of commercial rented housing. And in some Central Eastern European countries, the rented sector is at the moment a no man's land. And what I argue is that megacities need a rented sector. They do not house only rich people, but also households with a middle income and a low income. And because of the need to reduce risks and to cope with a flexible labor market, it is important to have a rented sector. There are many definitions of social housing, and I propose a definition of a sector aimed to house predominantly households with a weak position, including low incomes, handicaps, and including minorities and migrants. There is a huge variety of social housing worldwide, with at least 4 types of social housing. It could be a marginal sector, separate from the market sector, for instance, the United States. It could be a broad, differentiated rented sector, like in Scandinavian countries and the Netherlands. It could be a temporary sector, a sector with temporary property subsidies and housing allowances. We can observe that in Germany, and it can also be combined with housing allowances, income related. What I have in mind, and what many people have in mind, are undivided megacities, and that's not so easy. You could ask the question, which variable determines house prices most? And the answer is, that is the number of jobs which you can reach from your home within half an hour commuting. And as long as metropolises are concentrations of employment, and as long as metropolises are accessible, then it means that in a free market, house prices and rents will be high in a metropolitan region. The current danger in many metropolises is that low-income households are crowded out, displaced from the central city areas to the periphery as a result of high property prices. So the policy priority in many cases is how to realize the undivided city with no spatial segregation, how to realize affordable housing. And I specify a number of affordable housing strategies. The first one is to stimulate specific social housing providers. You could argue, why social housing providers in a free market? But it is important to have institutions with a priority for target groups with lower and middle incomes, and a group which is not adopting risk selection, and that needs a public legal framework. A second important affordable housing strategy is reducing energy costs. Energy saving by better insulation, better installations. It may increase rents, but it reduces energy costs, and energy transition, which is more fundamental, from oil and gas to renewable sources like sun, wind and geothermic. Energy cost will become more and more crucial for housing affordability. So I finish with this overview of a number of affordable housing strategies which could be combined in the metropolis. Make room for social housing providers, adopt income-related housing allowances, redefine housing allocations priorities, supporting young starters on the urban housing market, the reuse of vacant offices, and finally the reduction of energy cost. This needs a regional coordination of housing policy, and in particular between central city and suburbs. Thank you very much.
A rumor that Russians might like football occasionally. Well, the center of the football universe in the next few years will be Brazil, and it gives me great delight to welcome Elisabete Franca from Sao Paulo to share her views with us.
Morning. First, thanks for the invitation. I will show to you the São Paulo experience. Well, some information. It is our metropolitan region where 25 million people live in, and 11 million live in São Paulo. And the bad news is that we share the city with 7 million cars, more than half part of the inhabitants of São Paulo have a car. It's a view of São Paulo. São Paulo is a city of contrasts. We could meet some rich neighborhoods near some poor neighborhoods. It's good because you mix the social class, but it's not easy to work with this complexity. It's our map of precarious settlements. It's our biggest problem in the city after the traffic jam. We have 3 million people living in precarious conditions. It means slums, tenement houses, illegal allotments. But this neighborhood is very densified. 30% of the population living in 10% of the territory. According to our housing plan that finished this year, we must construct 50,000 social units a year, and we needed 31 billion in subsidies. In general, we work with social housing, with public resources, 3 levels of public resources, federal, state, and municipal resources. And until 2009, we are working in slum upgrading, our biggest problem, with more than 200 families. It's an example. It's the largest slum in São Paulo, Heliópolis. So you work with putting infrastructure, and some problems like this, the old buildings, the old times, you construct a lot of old buildings and not with good quality, like Sergey told us, public space, etc. So informal settlements entry in the old buildings, and now you are reconstructing and provide good conditions to the poor people. But of course, 50,000 a year, we need to attract the private sector to work with us. It's our challenge. The challenge here is to do this.
Can we move the slide on?
Yeah.
Next slide.
Next slide, please. Well, now we're trying to attract the private sector because we need resources from this private sector. Our idea is to promote this attracting, to create new land use, to change zoning, to work with verticalization, and the most important instrument is the urban operation. I will show you. The new model think about rental to the social house and the popular market to sale. Next slide. It's the example. The verticalization could permit the mix between in the same building, social housing and market rent. Next. Next. It's an example. The private sector is working this project. 7% of the building is directed to the medium class, and 30% of the building is to the social housing and the mood rent housing. Next. Other program that we are developing with the private sector is the retrofit in central area. São Paulo has a lot of vacancy in the central area, and the municipality are buying these buildings, the old buildings, and transform them in housing. But we are mixing resources from the 3 levels of government and the private sector. Now we are constructing, retrofitting 15,000 units in the central area. Next, please. It's some examples of the buildings in the central area. Next. And the retrofit. It's good because you attract the young people and the couple without children to the central area and invigorate the central area. Next. And the last example we call urban operation. It's an urbanistic instrument where we define a territory in the city and you can improve the laws. So you can work with verticalization. We create a fund, the reserves that the private sector buy this verticalization possibilities. You use in housing, social housing, to construct social housing for people, for poor people that live in this area. We are working with 13,000 units. It's an example, it's a rich neighborhood. There is a big slum in the rich neighborhood, and you are transformed with a good quality of architecture, the slum, and to transfer the families to the new house with these private reserves. It's another example. It's a very important part of the city, very rich, and there is a lot of slums in these areas. And we will construct new units. Like this is the new units with social equipments like kindergarten, healthcare, and the families will change to the new units. It's social units. And the last example in the urban operation is that part of the city. It's an important part. It's the second most important urban operation. The families live in slums under the river. We have 10,000 families living in the precarious conditions, as you could see. And we buy all the lands, the orange lands, to construct this. Oh my God. Disappeared. The example of new buildings disappeared. Sorry. But this is the three examples when we trying to attract the private sector to work with municipal housing departments to solve the problem, this housing problem in São Paulo. Thank you.
Can I now invite some perspectives from Catalonia in Spain? David Falagan.
Thank you. Well, firstly, I'll briefly explain our concerns at the Sustainable Housing Laboratory of the 21st century, and then I'll complement Elisabete France's intervention in order to comment the work that we have developed in Sao Paulo in collaboration with CEHAP. Sustainable Housing Laboratory was founded in 2004, and the laboratory was designed as a learning space on collective housing, and it was materialized in a master's degree course at Polytechnic University of Catalonia. From the beginning, the objectives of the lab have gone beyond this academic approach. The aim of the lab is to propose and disseminate a panoramic view of contemporary housing, addressing the complexity of the issues related to it, that is social, urban, technological, or environmental. Most of our works share a set of methodological approaches. Everything starts with the formulation of some questions, in the same way as a scientific laboratory raises hypotheses that must be tested. Then we develop graphical responses to facilitate understanding of the answer to any one. Finally, the task focuses on the interpretation of the results to define tools that allow the improvement of development of the settling, management tools, regulation, teaching tools, project tools. Throughout all this process, we maintain the following premise. Housing that creates city, generating living spaces and allowing personal growth of its people is not a scenography, but a space of increasing complexity and multiple layers of analysis and readings. One way to summarize the concept we care about is the table of comprehensive assessment tools that cover different scales of intervention. When we deal with the scale of a residential complex, we found that it must respond to the diversity of uses, facilities, or housing types that neighborhood requires. But we also analyze if it has been taken into account environmental criteria in its construction, attending, for example, to the best orientation and ventilation conditions. Moreover, when we approach the scale of housing unit, we observe issues ranging from housing hierarchization to its ability to be adapted to either technological or social changes. We like to make visible these qualities of residential architecture in the same way that it's done in other fields. That's what we have done in some of our works. Here you can see the template elaborated for the exhibition Inhabiting the Present, where we used for visualize topics for analysis over 40 housing projects in Spain. These are some general questions related to the four main areas that we consider to evaluate housing: society, city, technology, and resources. This sort of comprehensive assessment template is willing to be a collective, open, and ongoing work. It can be improved, expanded, and adapted to every location. And one of the places we have been the opportunity to apply this methodology has been precisely Sao Paulo, where we have worked together with CEHAF. Between 2005 and 2012, CEHAF has promoted a long series of operations to improve informal settlements and housing relocation projects. Our intervention, which we call Tools for Inhabiting Sao Paulo, has been designed a guide for monitoring these projects, establishing a set of evaluation criteria for the next phase of intervention. We proposed a tool that works as a checkup of each operation, seeking to improve the quality of the spaces beyond the normative regulations. So we wanted to evaluate all the scales, suggesting a guideline for the project development for designers, as well as a tool that could monitor and evaluate the impact of the project. And meanwhile, useful for dialogue between the different parties involved in the process. To build this tool, we have worked in 4 scales: the settling, the residential complex, the building, and the housing unit. In each of them, there have been integrated urban, social, economic, and environmental questions. The 4 scales of analysis are supplementary between them, because housing units should be available in relation to the gut organization of the block and the environmental condition of public space, facilities, and the whole settling. Basically, on these 4 scales, we propose to analyze 6 variables: adaptation, diversity, mobility, morphology, facilities, and sustainability. From the intersection of the 6 variables and the 4 scales, we obtain the relation scheme of the 25 items that we must check. So it was applied to 29 locations in Sao Paulo. As I said before, this tool is proposed so that the management of the process requires communication and dialogue between the parties, the participation of users, and the proper relationship between public and private entities. So the file work is very important for the success of the whole process. You can see here different moments of this file work in Sao Paulo. And to conclude, I want to show some examples of the application of this analysis tool, which is based on asking questions. For example, in the scale settling, one of the questions of the item consolidation is, are unbuildable areas integrated into existing or proposed public spaces to avoid residual spaces? We have the answers. These are different questions and different scales about the complex, about the building. For example, in the building, we ask, are they proposed any non-residential uses on the ground floor? Commerce, facilities, etc. So, this way, we complete 25 item assessment templates, like this one, where we mark the answers supporting us in graphic documents. And the goal is to arrive here, a diagram that graphically shows possible imbalances of the projects, a tool to locate the weaknesses where the work must be focused. We call it equalizer, as the joint of qualifier and equalizer, precisely one tool that allows us to visualize the volumes of each frequency to regulate and correct the intensity of the tones. And that's exactly what we try to do here, make visible to correct. We think that this is the way to support the empowerment of people, their perception of safety and comfort, and ultimately their sense of belonging and their right to the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. I'd like to welcome Rebecca Roberts Hughes from the Royal Institute of British Architects in London to give a British perspective. Welcome.
Well, thank you all for having me here today in this really interesting session. The Royal Institute of British Architects has 40,000 members, mostly in Britain, but also across the world. And we also have a royal charter to promote the benefits of good quality design for society. So with that in mind, we've been doing a lot of work recently looking at housing. Britain has a major housing shortage at the moment. We're building roughly a third of the homes that we need to be building every year. And as a result of that, the quality is suffering also. Because there aren't enough homes for people, they tend to get what they're given rather than vote with their feet and choose the sort of homes that they want. With that in mind, we've done an awful lot of research into what people do want. We did a survey for the Case for Space, which found that only 1 in 4 people would choose to live in a new home in England. The chief reason that they don't like new homes is that they say they are too small. We then measured 4,500 homes being built in England, and we found that the public are right. The average home within our sample was roughly 10% below minimum standards for space that have been brought in London only. In a family-sized home, that's about the size of a bedroom in terms of floor area. There was an interesting presentation I was in yesterday by Tim Stoner, and he mentioned that you have to observe how people live and look at how they use streets and spaces before designing things that they will want and need, and I completely agree with that. That's the reason that we did The Way We Live Now, which is another piece of research, and we went and observed people inside their homes. We went and filmed 5 typical British households throughout the course of the day to find out which spaces they used and what they wanted and needed from future homes, and we found that people prioritised flexibility, they wanted more storage in their homes, and they also wanted better technological adaptations within their homes. I've also had the privilege of working with an independent commission over the last year, the Future Homes Commission, and they released their report last month. They led an independent inquiry into how Britain can deliver more and better homes, and they made some really interesting recommendations, one of which was that local government pension funds should be reinvested to provide rental housing in different local areas. And they suggested that the income from rental properties would actually be higher than those pension funds were seeing from their own investments at that time. So it's a good way of topping up pension funds for local government and also for providing more rental homes. Flexibility is really important when you're designing homes of the future, and there are a couple of reasons that that's the case in Britain, and I think they also apply here in Moscow. One of those is that tenures change quite frequently. People in Britain tend to buy a home if they can afford to. That's the tenure of choice. And for those that can't, there are affordable or social homes, which are subsidised by the government and are roughly 20 to 40% below the local market rate. However, those tenures change over time. People can buy their affordable home off the local government or off the housing provider, and then they become private owners, and they can rent those homes out as well. And also, local government can ask private developers to provide some social homes as a condition of getting planning permission to build within an area. For this reason, homes shouldn't be designed just for one tenure. They're going to have to adapt to different types of households over time. We also have a changing population in the UK. We're seeing an increasing number of single-person households and of lone parent families. We also have an ageing population. Over the next 20 years, the number of people over 65 is going to increase by about 5%. And I know that's something you're also seeing here in Moscow. I was in a presentation yesterday where somebody said that in the future, 35% of people living in Moscow are going to be pensioners. So homes have to be adaptable and flexible for that changing population. In this context, flexibility might mean rooms that can be used for more than one function. So you can see from this slide, our research for the way we live now found that there were some universal needs that all of the households expected, and those were a spacious and flexible main living area, which they would use for eating, cooking, for socializing, for having friends round and entertaining, or just spending time together as a household. And whilst everybody expected that, older residents needed to be able to adapt their home more. They needed to perhaps adapt it if they needed a walking aid or a wheelchair to move around. And we also found that households with children expected something slightly different. Whilst they wanted a spacious main living area, they did want to have separate rooms in different parts of the house, so that, for example, they could have a home office that the children couldn't run in and out of. So we would advise people to build rooms that can be used for more than one function, something that can be adapted to a bedroom or a dining room or a home office. We've also seen some interesting examples of new approaches to flexibility, such as creating movable partition walls, or providing the basic structure of an apartment, which might include the kitchen and the bathroom, and then asking people where they want to put the walls so that they can structure the rooms as they would like them. This is an example of a mixed tenure community in London, which the Future Homes Commission visited. And I found out earlier on that Elisabete has also visited it, so it's quite a popular example. The role of design here is to make sure that there's no difference between the people who can afford to live privately and buy their own home and those that are renting through social rent from the government. And you can see from the image that there's absolutely no distinction on the exterior of the homes. This means that there isn't an area which becomes lower quality, that there is no stigmatization of different people, and there's also more of a social mix because residents get to meet one another within that shared area. Lastly, I just wanted to show you some of the things that the typical British family looks for when they're choosing a home. We asked people to rank 14 attributes on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most important. And those that achieved 5 most often were natural daylight, privacy from neighbours, so windows that don't overlook other people's areas, and better sound insulation, and also space, so the size of the rooms and the corridors. And last of all, if you'd like to read any of this research, this is our website, so you can go and check it all out there. Thank you.
Can I welcome Andrey Nesterenko, the General Director of the Rose Group from here in Russia, again for another local perspective.
Good morning. Before I start my slides, let me give you some statistics very quickly, because I have only just 5 minutes to speak. And I think everyone knows that the density of the population is very high. So the main density is Moscow region. Otherwise, we are living very sparsely in the country. About 14% of the population of the entire population of Russia is located in Moscow. So then the total area, the rental space is 12%. So the amount of rental space, housing space. And if you look what's happening to real estate prices, so they're skyrocketing. So they keep skyrocketing and very rapidly. And so the birth rate is barely catching up. If I remember last year, it was kind of was equal to the death rate, mortality rate. And so why? Because people are getting tired of it. So because I hear. So everyone is sick and tired of the situation, and so that's why we're trying just to give a new perspective on the situation, how we can move forward, because I don't want to go into details of the presentation. I will just scratch the surface. So we have seen these pictures, and so this is the legacy. It's horrible. So it looks drab and dreary and sad and despondent. And so we need to do something about that, because Moscow certainly developed much faster, and some areas were moving faster. So then the Khrushchev area, so this prefabricated concrete 5-storied despondent buildings, horrible. So they're disgusting to look at. You want just to go into a dark corner and shoot yourself when you look at these horrible buildings. And then here, just you want to die too. Yeah. So first you're afraid that you will die, and then you're afraid you won't. And so then the Moscow government needs to address this issue. So then the volumes of businesses and residential and commercial housing so is much bigger than the capacity and the throughput capabilities of our roads, and this is all oppresses us and brings us down. And so let me show you the pictures of what's happening in Moscow. Everything is changing fast. So now we're thinking differently. So we're getting ready for it. So we do the different layout, and so the buildings become more attractive. So we're more daring and dashing in our new designs, etc. But at the same time, so we cannot do many things. So there is a lack of parking, and but there is no parking, so they make a stupid thing, just building a high-rise block of apartments, and so in absence of parking and other communal amenities. For whom we're all doing that, and so what are the prerequisites? Let me explain why I'm starting with this slide. So these wonderful people, I don't know, I never met them, I took them from the internet, but they look nice to me, outgoing people, benevolent people. And so I've heard many presentations, listened, and there is a Dutch architect, Jan Gill, and so he started to develop a new line in urban development, so there's everything just for the environment, for the ecology. And so, but the main challenge for us is that we design from the bird's eye view, and then we look whether it looks good if you fly on a plane and look through the window, and we do not realize maybe it looks nice, but if you just go down, so it looks horrible. And but outside looks nice, but then you can look all this nice around also, so on the symmetric streets and blocks of apartments. But if you are on the ground, you are scared and you're horrified and you are depressed, and that is why. So the main, so what was so the big team that we've been working with for a long period of time. So Sergey, our partner, Chulov is our partner, so a big group of architects helping us, so the general designer, and so Vladimir Plotkin is here with us, participated in this new project. So we have a big team inside our company. So the same guys who are sick and tired and want to break through and want to do it all differently, and want to do it better, and so to start a new approach. And this we're a public company, and we have a chance to raise money, to raise financial resources, and there is available funding. So we decided to do this project for the people, for our hearts and souls, and so because we decided we decided to be big for once, and to be magnanimous for once, and to build it all the way it should be for people. So we do have the corridors, but sometimes the distance between the buildings is 60-70 meters, so they're not like narrow corridors. And we make it pleasant for the people to live. So we moved into the future, so new quality construction era, and we moved to another. So I am against the prefabricated panels, because the prefabs is a dead thing, and it depresses you. So we do individual construction for the people, and we feel what people feel, and we pick their brains, we ask what they want. So with the design, the layout of the apartments, so we completely change them. So it's much easier to put the furniture inside. So we removed the partitions between the kitchen and the living room because they want it. And so because people want to think differently, want to organize their living space differently. And we do it for the families. So first we decided to build low-rise buildings, so no more than so we have, so as you move to the center, so the buildings get shorter, and so you don't have this feeling of a well, that you're living in a well, so looking up and see the sky. And so then more than 50 apartments, and so no more than 8, 12. So the apartments, three-room apartments. Very difficult to sell 3-room apartments. It's amazing, but it's difficult because the apartments in the highest demand are 1-room apartments because they're cheaper. But there is a demand still for all types of apartments. And actually you form a different quality of living, and it's not that every 5th apartment is for the investor who keeps it in mothballs and waiting for the money for the value of your apartment to go up and then resell. So everyone sells, people live. There is a nice concept, so there is a kindergarten nearby, school nearby, hospital nearby, and the family lives there. Another, so for any project this level, we need economy of scale and adjacent territories. We have 1.5 million square meters can be built there. And so there is a metro nearby, so good transportation, because without good transportation this wouldn't be possible. So even if we build it in the middle of nowhere, it's horrible, because if there is no metro station, so the roads, the inroads are very short, very narrow, and so they will not be able to put through all the traffic, and the people just only come elsewhere to work, and then they come back, and at weekends people live there, so they're happy to live there, and because they like where they live, and the proximity of the metro is very important. So a lot of attention is paid to the landscape. And so bicycles, walking around, and so this big spaces, public spaces, very important. And the layout of the apartments, they need to be open, adaptive, flexible as the project evolves, because the panel, prefabricated panel industry does not allow for that. But our type of construction allows for the change inside the apartments, and that's the most challenging is parking, certainly. So traditionally. So we don't have underground parking. So I know lots of parkings that they will be doing parkings, and so then people. So sometimes they commission the building, but there is no underground parking, and people just are afraid just to get out because everything is cluttered by cars. And so that is why understanding that in future people evaluate that. So we decided we lost some space, and we put all the cars in underground parkings, and we forbade people to park outside. And so we have lots of kindergartens and schools, individual project design schools and kindergartens, because people are waiting just for when the nurseries and the kindergartens will be commissioned. But we are trying to do it simultaneously.
And so to give you some example of what we used to have, so over 50% of the first stage was sold over the first 12 months. As soon as people have a look, they see the difference. They run around, they see, they compare. And when other people promise that there are a similar example, but then you use panels, of course they compare and come back to us. Because we built properly, and we do not pay so much attention to finance, but to the social quality of this housing. Over 50% are families, and 50% are Muscovites who just moved to the suburb because they got fed up with Moscow conditions, and we have people from the suburbs, from the vicinity, only 20% of them. And in order to develop this, of course, we need a dialogue, and we shall keep talking, we shall discuss it, how it can be done, but the dialogue should be very proper and correct. Sometimes developer, gets disappointed that when you have all the headaches to arrange the network, the infrastructure, to arrange with the officials, and they do not listen to you, and I guess we shall have to cope with it all to arrange it. And the most important thing that I didn't have a chance to say in the very beginning is the human psychology. This psychology should be normal. I believe this is a sacrilege to make these houses gray. It's also colorful, and when you go out for a walk, you have a different perception. It has been proven that the more you look at bright things, the better you feel. And so I hope that we shall help this world, with this project, that we shall copy it. And thank you very much for your attention.
Our final contributor, before we have a chance to discuss, is Vladimir Plotkin, who I know you'll be very keen to give a warm welcome to and to give a good hearing to. Thank you.
Добрый день. Ну, на самом деле, я с удовольствием принял.
Good morning. I was happy to accept the invitation to participate in this forum because this year I accepted another invitation to teach in the new Moscow Architectural School, School of Architecture. So surprisingly, the topic that I wanted to develop during the next school year with my future students overlaps and corresponds to exactly this seminar topic. I wanted to think, as I have been interested for a long time, of affordable housing in the city environment. Because we understand that the low-income families and residents and the migrants for permanent and temporary dwelling with further segregation or assimilation. I don't want to use long words and terms. We're not going to estimate the social and political aspects of the processes. Accelerate and make the affordable housing issue more acute. Where should all those social groups live, and what model of residence will not really harm and spoil the infrastructure and the customs and the culture of the city? And if our professional community has thought of ways to address this issue, this is the most interesting chapter or segment of the design very often is overlooked by our architects. I don't doubt the program that is successful or not. You can consider it as such, that has been carried out over the last 60 years. So the standardized panel housing construction that was targeted to address the affordable, cheap housing conditions for the social and protected. But today we have different missions, different challenges. And, you know, not just to provide people with some housing. It should not be some. It should be. On one hand, we have this trend to archaic projects when the or use of progressive methods in the archaic solutions. When we have those simple designs, simple facades, simple faces of houses, lifespan, industrial, cheap, poor quality, poor architectural standard houses, faceless regions of suburbs of the city that cannot really shape into the city. I understand these are general words, but we need to think about it. We really need to find new unconventional solutions to this issue. And I believe that with my students I want to discuss it and try to feel, try to address and create several models to address this issue without even denying the standard conventional ones. So the typical, the out-of-the-box houses with existing projects, but doing something special to them, either typology, similar houses, and then just postponing the new issues to further to future generation, because we build now cheap houses, but we don't know then what to do with them next, because we do not even think about their utilization or decommissioning. And very often we think about our lifespan, but we don't know what to do with them at the end of their lifespan. 50 years are over, and mainly the houses are tired and obsolete and dilapidated, and we have now these refurbishing or demolition programs, but unfortunately it is all very vague, unclear, non-transparent. We don't understand how to address it. We are just, having this head-on collision with those houses, and we just demolish them completely, and then it becomes unclear where to take all this construction garbage trash to the city dumps, filling them with those construction materials. This is horrible. There's another way to address this issue. There's actually several ways, a so-called temporary architecture, which is a very interesting story for the social economic aspects. in the present status of this society, with the fixed lifespan and with further utilization or reuse of those houses. But in fact, the topic is not new. It had been popular during the 1960s and in the view of futurology. Currently, talking about the architecture of sustainable development, there are several ways to carry out to arrange, to provide for this sustainable architectural development. Either you build proper sustainable houses from the very start, getting old nicely, who can serve you hundreds of years. This is one understandable, clear, and correct way. There's another way that is absolutely proper as well and has the right to exist, and that is temporary architecture. So you make a model like a car, for instance, that will be valid for the next 5 to 10 years from cheap materials, inexpensive materials with fixed expiry date. It can serve its purpose for the next probably 15 years, and then it can either be reused or utilized or disassembled. But again, this is not exactly futurology. We have examples. We have success stories, so it can be reused. And another way, the third way, is so-called adaptive architecture, which would be ready to shape in and replace the specific feature and properties to borrow from other typology, which would be relevant in 5 years, in 10 years, so a legal member of the city or of the urban environment. So we have already seen similar attempts. So we cannot always say that they were successful as a social experiment. So you build initially very high quality facades built somewhere in the 70s, 90s in France, and very good example. But the question is, in this case, of course, I appeal to the residential quarters, Ricard de Boffil and other French architects' designs. So sometimes they're successful, but not in a socio-economic aspect. But the architect, unfortunately, cannot offer new models to the society. An architect can suggest the new environment that can help the social economic model to develop in a healthy manner. Therefore, in our developments, we shall test and taste several problematic city zones where we shall turn them into kind of labs for multifaceted analysis to reflect the physical, social, eco-architectural aspects. So consider all the aspects of city life within the concept of inexpensive social residential models, and find out which are the models and the customs and the culture and the type of residence can match this territory and can be copied to address the challenges that we have currently. I hope it will serve as a foundation for further development of strategies and ideas and specific offers whereby we could estimate and understand further recommended typology of the residential house building and new constructions, new materials and approaches. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. If I've been listening carefully, I think there were several points made. Firstly, Mr. Kuznetsov set the stage, talked about the scale of the challenge, the centrality of design, and he focused our attention on quality of life issues. Then we heard from Chlie about the need to defuse the social and political time bomb and the need to provide public assistance to build half a good house that would appreciate in value. Then we heard from the Netherlands about the development of a private rented sector being crucial, especially with homes built within 30 minutes of work opportunities, and the need for dedicated specialist institutions to build affordable homes for local people. Then we heard from Brazil, again a question of scale, about the need to engage the market and the challenge of retrofitting infrastructure to unofficially built homes. Then we heard from Spain about the tools required for housing development and about the need for a comprehensive consultative assessment. Then we heard from the UK an interesting question about whether pension funds might play a role in investing in social housing, but then crucially the point about the need for flexible, adaptable homes, both in terms of their physical structure and in terms of housing tenure. Then two local contributions, again focusing on the issue of design, the need for high-quality construction, a real challenge to the idea that prefabrication was necessarily a solution. Then finally, we heard about the need for innovative solutions, the false economy of cheaply built, early obsolescent housing, and the need for some acknowledgement that some buildings might have a temporary use and that might need to be adapted in the way that they're built. And somewhere in there, there was an encouragement for Muscovites to be romantic, to fall in love and make babies. So if that was the discussion in a nutshell, I'm wondering whether any of you have questions in our final 10 minutes, 10, 11 minutes. If we can find microphones, I'd be delighted to give you an opportunity to ask questions of our international panel. But just to start the discussion, one of the underlying themes was whether the public sector alone can face these challenges and what is the right mix of regulation, public spending, and incentives that city and national governments might need to give if there's to be a public-private partnership that's capable of providing a solution. So what's the right mix of public and private interventions here? I see you all looking down. I wonder whether anybody wants to offer an initial view on whether this is a challenge for our cities and for governments alone, or whether there's a genuine need for a mixed public-private solution, and if so, what are the right kinds of incentives and regulations that states and cities should bring forward. I wonder, Mr. Kuznetsov, whether you'd be kind enough to start with some thoughts whilst people think of questions from the floor.
Спасибо.
Thank you. Yes, I'm ready to say a couple of words about this. So indeed, this type of construction in Russia probably faces different challenges compared to Brazil or Chile. We are slightly different. As here in Moscow, we have this residential building, and sleeping quarters is rather not to provide for the poorest and marginal population, but actually even people who are ready to pay completely for purchasing the house can be the dwellers, can be the residents of some. We have social programs of providing. We have waiting lists for the families to get such an apartment, and we of course need to appreciate the role of the public sector. And another important factor is rental housing. So unfortunately, the market is undeveloped. Absolutely, that in the teething period, we virtually have no private operators. Neither the public or private sector in this process is not involved at all. And there are no even discussion, no even field for discussion. We are only starting to address it, and I believe that in our master plan we shall have a special sector for developing of this sector. Through the rental concept, we can improve the quality and provide for many more people. And of course, we are already doing this. It's not just the talk, but the walk. We are talking to the banking institution, and once we find the mechanism of involvement of the private sector into this long money, with a very long payoff period, with a long break-even period, and once they really go for it and say, we do not just provide free housing for the marginal and poor people, but we help to subsidize and involve many more people. We understand it's very difficult to buy your own property. It's difficult, and very little share of people can afford it, and then it cuts, it limits, it restricts the number, because it's very difficult. For instance, if you need to move, it's very difficult to sell and then buy. The logistics is very cumbersome and complicated, rather than you just stop your rent and rent somewhere else. So this is a very easy way to move if you rent but not own. And then the quality of the environment. Yes, that's another question to us. So we rent or buy, and what's the number of people? I was saying in my presentation, we have two other items to discuss: the quality of environment design and the public environment. It does not have to be only socially unprotected and the poor and the desperate and the marginal people, but just lower, even lower middle class families can be subsidized and provided with a comfortable residence. So we understand the issue. They do exist. I believe that they're very important in Moscow, and they are mirrored in many other issues like traffic and the congestions. And I believe that over the next 2 years, as we address it, the situation may change.
It's about the need for a mixed economy of housing provision, but I wonder whether first we might hear from Mr. Nesterenko, who has a private perspective on some of the housing challenges. Any views from your point of view on the need for public-private solutions?
So I don't even know what language I should use, English or Russian. So the main issue here is that all the dialogue boils down to the cost of construction and the margin that the private sector is getting, and therefore that's how you get the final price and the opportunity to buy and affordability. So the main initiative should be targeted at assisting the developers in reducing the cost factor. That's exactly where the government, the public sector, can help. The important thing is land allocation and preparation, and there are a number of hurdles and low transparency of the starting costs, and now we have been observing the changes in the legislation. We see the bids, and sometimes the developer cannot have the right cost of land at the start, and then very often the grids and the infrastructure falls on the developer, and then when you pass them to MOEC or MOESC, suddenly you have to pay all the taxes, because MOESC says, why are you giving? I don't want it. Compensate me. Give me even the VAT, First you build it, and then you have to pay to get rid of it. So it means that I have to transfer the costs to the poor customer, and then I have to build a school or a kindergarten, or keep it or pass it to the public authorities after I build it. And the difficulty is in Russia that we want to divest of the non-core activities, and there are no taxes. But how do we guarantee that it's our residents who will send their kids into those schools and daycare? Because there's no guarantee, and the quality of teachers will be, the quality of teaching will be at the proper level. So each step that you want to assure, the cost is growing. It adds up to the cost, and therefore the main method is probably the dialogue about each article that is of of concern to developers. Of course, you cannot, have all the people with clean hands. Some of them may probably cut corners, but most important that we start this dialogue, and it contributes to everybody's success.
You might go further in your assessment of a need for a mixed economy and a range of provision.
I think we always mix of public and private powers, and the mix may be different in different countries. The public dimension is important, for instance, in a housing act, to provide a framework to guarantee a certain quality, to guarantee a certain affordability, and to guarantee that there is enough supply. And we need the market to deal with variety and with creativity and with flexibility. Even in the constitution of many countries, we see that there is something like a right to house. If there is a low income, there is not the alternative sleeping rough on the street, but there is the alternative of simple housing and so on. So I think it's the mixture. It may change over time, it may be different in different countries, and there is always the danger that when the public framework is on a national or a federal level, that then there is bureaucracy and then there may be uniformity. So it's important that we try to decentralize the public framework to cope with regional and local differences.
Okay. I'm not seeing any hands from the floor. I never known Moscow to be shy. So I'm looking for a question, because otherwise I'm going to indulge all of my questions about Chile and Brazil, and the UK, of course. But is there a question from the floor?
They need Brazilian coffee, I think.
Yeah, I think we have one. Yes? Very good.
Hello. How actually do you combine the concept of cheaper housing and the concept of environmentally friendly landscape development infrastructure? Because definitely the green technologies require higher costs, but we believe that the housing should be affordable. So how can you, where's the right balance between the cost and the environmental? And what do you do with the panel producing factories? Do we reorient them or just kill them? What those factories that produce panels?
And then a Brazilian perspective on those, and I'll save our Brit for the next question.
Again, I would like to step back and try to understand the big picture. Sustainability or environmentally more efficient envelopes for the majority of the world is not about saving energy or avoiding energy loss, but about avoiding energy gains. In the majority of the world that we will need to build for with very little money, it's going to be within the tropics, not outside the tropics. So the real threat is not that of cold, but that of heat. So for that, at least the good news is that there's no technology needed, but common sense. The world has developed for millennia, for centuries, quite efficient devices to ventilate, cross-ventilation and shading. And that is just a matter of design, not a question of technology. So I guess we need to invest more time thinking and designing than reducing costs.
Elisabete?
I totally agree that the social house is not an economical problem. So it's impossible to think it's impossible to think that social housing must need to be cheap. I think the government need to think that constructing social housing is not only housing, you are constructing a city. And so constructing a city is not cheap, it's expensive. And the new century, you need to think in environmental materials, environmental constructions, etc., etc. And it turns the social housing very expensive. But it's the price that the urbanization, the world costs. It's important that the governments, with the private sector and the needs of the private sector, thinking correctly about that. We have old experience in Brazil. We construct millions of poor social housing in the periphery, poor materials, cheap costs, etc., etc. And now we are working in an enormous program in São Paulo to rebuild these units. So the relation, in my opinion, couldn't exist. Social housing and cheap price, cheap costs.
Okay, I gather you wanted to add something. And then what I'd like to do is just take up the second element of the question, which is, what if we make the panel production obsolete, and both our British and our second Russian contribution talked about the need to be highly adaptive in the way we use buildings. But firstly, yes, go ahead.
So as a Russian, I probably see the background of the question. I understand the idea. The heart of the matter is that you need to pay much attention to the development of the territory around the house when you build, because we mean planting trees and making lawns and make pavements and parking spaces and sandboxes and children playground. This is a painful issue because the most difficult thing is the managing. So the managing company, the developer may come and do it, but then the company that operates the house will forget about it.
So we have a standard. I'm talking about Russia, because in more developed countries, so they have solution to this issue. But as usual, we have not yet addressed this issue, and there is no solution yet. So we have a fixed standard for the management, so which is approved by on the regional level, and so but they do not take into consideration the improving costs are not there. So we can certainly plant some plants and trees, and that's it. And that is why so is developers' personal attitude to it. Whether if he wants to improve it, he will improve it and develop it. If not, then he will not even plant any trees, and so they leave it like a or just put some grass, sow some grass, or put some sand, and that's it. So it's all just at the discretion of the developer. So, but some management companies, so they're very good, and so they're developing it. So they're adding adding value, but it's an additional cost, and that's why they're not interested unless they have to do it. So they won't do it, and that's why we need to dialogue with the state to improve the.
Mr. Plotkin, is adaptability an opportunity or a threat for the supply chain and the supply industry? Do you want to go first, and then we'll close with Mr.
Yeah,
Plotkin.
sure. Thank you. I think the UK is quite different because prefabricated housing isn't very popular in Britain. In the 1960s, a prefabricated tower block called Ronan Point partially collapsed when there was just a small gas explosion, and so we've moved away from that method of construction. I actually think it's going to pick up more in the future, because we need to build so many more homes, so much with a lot more speed. I've seen behind the scenes that some people are starting to look at prefabricated methods again as a way of getting homes built quickly and more cheaply. And if it's cheaper to do, then more money can be spent on design. And I think adaptability will play a role in the relationship between the homes and the spaces around them, so that they can be extended using prefabricated walls just being kind of added on if all the walls are already serviced. So it's difficult to comment on what would happen over here, but I think in Britain we'll start to see more of it in the future.
Mr. Plotkin?
Effectively, and prefabricated construction. So there's nothing horrible about it. I agree with Rebecca, because it's quite progressive, it's cheap, it's fast, and so they do it in Europe, and they do it in other countries. In Finland, they do prefab buildings. In Denmark, to the best of my knowledge, I was in Germany, so they're building prefab standardized, mass-produced. So certainly they require new technology, so they can be improved, and insulation, etc. And so it's not. And then we have lots of factories that manufacture those prefab panels. So they need to be refitted. They need to be new equipment need to be brought in. So they need to be properly equipped. And so because the new standards. So if we just move from the old type of prefab panel construction and move to new panels, and so make them more effective, more efficient, more energy efficient, etc. So we can just build more and more. And this is not. It's very important, because the speed of the construction, and for me as an architect, it's very important. We need just to factor it in, because certainly we cannot save on design of cheap housing, because we can save on the construction of cheap housing, but never on the design, because if we do the right design, so mass design, which people will be comfortable with, happy with good layout. And for this, we need to invest. And so because the design stage is extremely important, because what will follow up will be of lesser importance, because once you have good housing, good design, good approach, then it will be easier to build, and people will be happy. So we need to pay more attention to the design. And so because the prefab panel housing construction, so our future is there. And so we'll have to go back to it. I have to go back to it. Let me follow up on the request of Sergey Semyonovich Sobyanin. He's thinking about it, so he started to study this issue about the prefab housing, and all these factors that actually scare people off, because there is a stereotype, this Khrushchev type, 1950 type construction scares people. But we need to change this approach, and so we need the approaches to design should be different, and so then these plans for manufacturing, so then they should not be the same standard type, drab and dreary, same design everywhere, mass construct. We need to avoid that. And so it should be less repetitive. They should be less monotonous. So there should be different types and shapes and forms of those prefab housing. We can make it more festive. And so there are no public first ground floors, for example, given away to retail surfaces. But there are already plants that manufacture those prefabs that are ready to take one step further and use the state-of-the-art new designs and start manufacturing two types of prefabs. And so then this bad stereotype will be destroyed, and people will look upon this new kind of housing more benevolently. But the mass construction, so so we'll certainly be able just to build different forms and shapes, and vertical, horizontal, at the same time. So we'll do several designs, and at the same time we'll concentrate on the main advantages of the prefab construction, which is the speed and cost. And we'll try to do both, and we'll avoid the monotony.
Comprehensive answer. I will say this to you. This is a splendid array of talent and experience, both local and international. I would look at their faces very carefully and grab them over coffee to ask any particular questions you may have. It's unusual to have such a range of contributions, and I'd like to invite you to thank them in the traditional way. Can I say that coffee awaits you? Thank you very much for participating in this morning's session, and good luck with the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Уважаемые участники форума, объявляется перерыв. В фойе для вас накрыт кофе-брейк. Напоминаем, что также в фойе работает зона воркшопа.
Dear forum participants, there will now be a break. We welcome you to the foyer for tea and coffee, and would like to remind you that the workshop zone is active in the foyer.